Hello and welcome to CyberByte FM, your ultimate source for cybersecurity, privacy, compliance, AI, and threat intelligence. Get expert insights, breaking news, and practical tips to stay one bite ahead in the digital world. Unlock the code to safer systems, decode the threats shaping tomorrow. Hit subscribe and join the frequency. The year 2025, it defined a new level of aggression. Our retrospective confirms over 12,000 documented data breaches globally. And what we're seeing are systemic failures, really at an alarming scale, driven by organized crime and, well, highly sophisticated nation-state actors. But here's the single truth that needs to land on every executive table. For small to mid-sized businesses, if you were hit, ransomware was an 88% certainty.
That level of exposure is commercially crippling. It signals a fundamental shift in the threat economy. Boards really need to move beyond just the technical explanations and understand the macro forces that are driving these failures.
And that's exactly why we're here. Today, we're delivering a truly boardroom-ready retrospective. I'm focusing on the strategic implications, the so what of this intelligence.
And I'm here with the hard data we need to make informed, defensible decisions.
Right. We are going to conduct a deep dive into three critical forces that characterized last year: the exponential surge of ransomware, widespread credential abuse, and of course the catastrophic failure of third-party supply chains. This analysis should provide the strategic clarity you need to recalibrate your 2026 budget priorities and, frankly, to survive. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the macro trends. Let's begin with the sheer scope of the ransomware problem. Just how prevalent did extortion become?
It became the single most prevalent action in successful breaches. Ransomware surged 37% year over year. And crucially, it was present in a shocking 44% of all breach incidents reviewed.
44%.
That's up from 32% the year prior. So to put that in perspective, nearly 1 out of every 2 organizations that had a serious incident had a ransomware component.
That number is terrifying. It means organizations are just failing to block that initial execution phase. But on the financial side, I saw that, 64% of victims chose to refuse payment, even with a median ransom demand of around $115,000. What does that tell us about our defenses?
Well, it's a nuanced signal. On one hand, yes, the majority refusing payment suggests that organizational resilience is maturing. Strong backups, tested incident response plans.
But we have to be critical of that.
You do. Does that 64% represent the entire market? Or just the, let's say, well-resourced enterprises who could afford 2 weeks of downtime to rebuild? The failure isn't avoiding the payment. The failure is still allowing the infection to execute in the first place.
That's a key distinction. The operational cost of recovery. It far outweighs the ransom demand in so many cases. So while we're managing the incident better, the infection rate itself is soaring. And this brings us to really the most vulnerable link in the chain, the vendor ecosystem.
The data on third-party involvement is, it's impossible to ignore. It effectively doubled last year. It now accounts for 30% of all analyzed incidents. And this systemic risk is being amplified by basic hygiene failures, weak access controls, unpatched vendor infrastructure.
Right. And this is where the strategic risk moves beyond just your standard third-party cyber risk management checklists. We saw a definitive trend emerging from nation-state actors, something we call island hopping. Can you explain the mechanics of that for our audience?
Sure. Island hopping is basically a low-security path to a high-value target. Threat actors avoid going after the big corporations directly. Instead, they compromise a smaller, trusted vendor, that's the island, who already has access to the larger corporate network.
So they just hop from the vendor into the main target.
Exactly. It's an attack on the chain of trust itself.
And that trust is being exploited through foundational security failures. We saw that vulnerabilities targeting VPNs and edge devices accounted for a staggering 20% of initial access.
20%.
That is a huge crack in the digital wall. It means our perimeter defenses are collapsing right where we extended them for remote work and vendor access.
Well, the sheer number of CVEs we saw impacting VPNs, network storage, just meant that threat actors only had to wait for a single vendor to miss one patch cycle.
And that gives them their foothold.
It gives them their foothold, and the island hopping begins.
Precisely. That 20% is a direct signal. If your vendor is now the new perimeter, you have to treat their access with the same rigor you apply to your own core systems. All right, let's move into the field. Let's look at some specific industry failures, because the patterns here should be dictating your budget. Let's start with healthcare. It remains the primary target.
It does. Healthcare has the unenviable record of being the costliest sector for breaches for the 12th consecutive year.
Ugh.
The volume, the regulatory constraints, the value of protected health information, or PHI, it's all just too tempting for these groups. And the sheer scale of that risk was demonstrated by the Yale-New Haven health system incident. About 5.5 million patient records were affected.
And that exposed PHI and Social Security numbers.
It did. And the financial consequence wasn't just a fine, it was litigation. YNHHS agreed to an $18 million settlement.
$18 million. That's not a cost of doing business. That's the cost of a compliance failure. But let's look at the root cause. It wasn't their firewall that failed, was it?
Correct. The technical root cause was a vulnerability in a third-party file transfer service.
One of those legacy protocols.
Exactly. They're often overlooked, rarely updated, and yet they hold the keys to huge amounts of sensitive data.
That's the strategic takeaway. When boards see that $18 million settlement, they need to realize they're paying for a third-party application failure. It forces a governance discussion. Do we really need that service?
And this pattern of vendor compromise is pervasive. The Episource breach, which hit over 5.4 million records, just confirms it. If your digital partner is weak, you are vulnerable.
So, if healthcare is the costliest, let's pivot to education. Vendor risk there became an existential threat to millions of students' data. I'm talking about the PowerSchool breach. It's really the ultimate case study in vendor negligence. This breach exposed the records of millions of students and staff. The initial vector was, well, shockingly simple, a compromised contractor credential.
That's right. It was used to access their PowerSource customer support portal.
So what were the specific deficiencies the investigation found?
There were two critical ones. First, a total failure to use multi-factor authentication MFA on the contractor accounts. That's the most basic level of hygiene.
Wait, let me process that. A vendor holding highly regulated student data failed to enforce MFA on contractor accounts. That's not just negligence, that's recklessness.
It is. But the second failure was arguably more profound. The presence of a persistent, exploitable, always-on remote access feature baked right into their system.
Always on.
Meaning, once the simple credentials were breached, the door wasn't just open briefly, it was propped wide open, constantly.
That always-on access is the antithesis of modern security. It highlights a complete lack of zero-trust network access principles, ZTNA. Zero trust dictates that no one is trusted by default. You have to verify access continuously. If an external account is compromised, the blast radius should be minutes, not persistent. That's an architectural failure. Okay, moving out of institutional spaces and into the digital ecosystem itself, we have to talk about the credential compromise that's killing all these attacks. What did researchers uncover?
The scale is just unprecedented. Researchers uncovered a massive credential leak aggregating over 16 billion login credentials.
16 billion.
This data set was harvested by InfoStealer malware, and it's basically a blueprint for mass exploitation across platforms like Google, Apple, and Facebook, and deep into the corporate ecosystem.
16 billion logins means we have to assume identity is a commodity. You cannot rely on password strength or simple MFA when actors have lists that large.
And we saw this fueling attacks on core infrastructure. Take SK Telecom in South Korea. Their breach hit 23 million customers. The specific risk there was the theft of USIM authentication records.
And why is the theft of USIM records a bigger threat than, say, customer passwords?
Because it targets the foundational identity layer. USIM records are critical for authenticating users on the mobile network. Theft of these records carries a huge risk for SIM cloning and high-value account takeover.
So if an attacker clones a SIM, they can bypass any authentication that relies on SMS codes?
Any of it, putting enterprise mobile communication at severe risk.
Let's end this segment with a hard warning for leaders who rely heavily on software-as-a-service platforms. The TransUnion breach. 4.4 million records. A textbook failure in the shared responsibility model.
It is. The attack didn't target TransUnion's core infrastructure. It targeted a third-party Salesforce database used for consumer support.
So what's the takeaway for the board? This shows the extreme risk of third-party SaaS integrations. The attack exploited misconfigured API permissions in a connected integration. It wasn't a core Salesforce failure.
Exactly. In a SaaS model, you outsource infrastructure security, but you retain full responsibility for configuration and access. They misconfigured the permissions, granting excessive access. You cannot outsource accountability.
All right, let's turn this analysis into actionable strategy. We promised a boardroom-ready briefing. Based on these patterns, we have 3 strategic imperatives. This is your 60-second slide template. First, Transition to phishing-resistant MFA. Credential abuse is the easiest path in. Traditional MFA is being actively bypassed.
No.
Token theft succeeded 31% of the time. And MFA interruption, where they flood users with push notifications until they suffer from MFA fatigue.
MFA fatigue. They just click yes to make it stop.
Exactly. And that succeeded 22% of the time. It turns our security tools against us. So, you must mandate a shift away from SMS or push notifications. Transitioning to hardware keys or platform authenticator apps provides true phishing-resistant identity. This is an architectural mandate. Budget for it. Second strategic imperative, drastically reduce the third-party blast radius. With vendor involvement at 30%, this is non-negotiable. It means immediate action. Review and revoke stale OAuth tokens and credentials associated with connected SaaS integrations, like that Salesforce database we just discussed.
Stale tokens and unused API keys are just time bombs. An organization grants access for a project and then forgets to revoke it.
So implement strict ZTNA principles here. Enforce least privilege and time-limited access for every single external app. If a vendor doesn't need persistent access, they shouldn't have it. This limits the damage when an island-hopping attack hits a partner. And third strategic imperative, eliminate technical debt. Old, forgotten, or misconfigured systems are the easiest entry point. They fall outside of standard patching and audits.
We saw a clear metric on this. The median time to remediate leaked secrets like passwords or API keys found in public code repositories was 94 days.
94 days.
Nearly 3 months of exposure.
That's an unacceptable lag time. It has to be shortened. You must prioritize identifying, isolating, and decommissioning forgotten systems, especially those exposed to the internet. If you can't account for it, you can't defend it. Those are the 3 immediate actions. But before we conclude, we need to tell one more story that illustrates how compliance violations happen not through a hack, but through simple internal failure. Give us the 30-second risk story of Blue Shield of California.
The Blue Shield of California HIPAA violation affected 4.7 million members. And as you said, it was not a hack. The cause was improperly configured Google Analytics code on their website. This code inadvertently shared protected health information browsing histories, plan details with Google Ads over a 3-year period.
A marketing tool caused a massive HIPAA compliance failure.
Precisely. It perfectly illustrates the hidden risk of marketing pixels. These third-party tracking tools are a data leakage vector that is often completely ignored by security and governance.
So what does this all mean for you as leaders? The breaches of 2025 show that we're building high, expensive firewalls, but attackers are walking through back doors we left unlocked. Preparedness is the key to survival, but that preparedness must be strategic. The success stories moving forward won't be defined by how quickly an organization patched a 0-day. They will be defined by those who prioritize foundational architectural changes, like ZTNA and phishing-resistant identity. Security is no longer an IT function. It must be a fundamental business objective integrated into every vendor contract, every software deployment. You must manage the risk of the ecosystem, not just your own 4 walls. That is your briefing. Hit subscribe on YouTube at CyberByte FM and join the frequency for weekly intel. Stay secure.